Friends, the first time I came to Walt Disney World and Epcot, I thought I was gonna see something awesome because I had seen the merch, I had seen the fandom, I had seen the hype, and I had thought, oh, this Figment guy, he's gonna be awesome. Can't wait to meet him. But the first time I rode the ride and I got to meet Figment, I'm just gonna be honest, I was let down. I was like, this is what all the hype's about? This guy sucks. But then it had been explained to me I was meeting Figment 3.0, or more like Figment 2.5. So this video is for anyone like myself who doesn't quite understand Figment. Brickey here on the edge of the Imagination Pavilion and on the edge of a Florida thunderstorm. Let's get going. This is an explanation of who he is and where he came from. And turns out it was Disneyland. When Disney was designing Future World, the idea was that sponsors would pay for 80–90% of all the various different pavilions. But this means that no construction could start on any pavilion until a sponsor was willing to pay for it. And it wasn't until 1979 that Kodak stepped up and started to show some serious interest in sponsoring one of the pavilions. The Space, the Sea, and the Life and Health Pavilion were all the ones that were still available. But the Kodak executives, they wanted something a little bit more imaginative than what was left on the table. And Imagineering took that feedback, something more imaginative. They took that quite literal. And with that feedback, the Imagineers designed the Dreamfinder, a character who would be your level-headed guide, and his companion, a pint-sized purple dragon. And Figment would play a very important role. He would be the curious one, essentially being the setup man for the Dreamfinder and giving him the ability to flex his intelligence. And famed Walt Disney Imagineer Tony Baxter would create Figment and the Dreamfinder for the 1983 attraction. But they were ideas that existed earlier, ideas that go back to Discovery Bay, back home at Disneyland. There's always a Disneyland connection somewhere if you dig deep enough. Both characters were a part of an expansion that never came to Disneyland called Discovery Bay. An expansion that would have been roughly on the edge of Frontierland going into the area that we know today as Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. The attraction would have been like a fun house exhibit, where the attraction would be hosted by Professor Marvel and his unnamed dragon friend. But when we go back to the old Discovery Bay version of Figment, changing his name, because he was unnamed, won't be the only major change that would come along at the request of Kodak. You see, in the original concept art, Figment was green, but that wasn't going to go over with Kodak, whose major competitor was Fuji, and Fuji's logo and branding is all green, not the iconic yellow and red like Kodak. The Discovery Bay version of Figment and the Dreamfinder was called Professor Marvel's Gallery of Illusions, originally planned as a funhouse style attraction. A fascinating visit with the foremost collector of the exotic, weird, and whimsical from all over the world, according to a Disneyland press release from 1976. The attraction would be kind of steampunk meets circus with lots of different mythical creatures inside of it. Kind of not too far from Museum of the Weird that didn't happen at the Haunted Mansion, or what we see over in Guardians of the Galaxy, the Collector's Collection? Is that the Devon Collection? Entering through a sideshow wagon, guests would find themselves inside of sort of a carousel of progress, spinning around a show that would show Professor Marvel's exotic collection of mythical creatures. Professor Marvel himself would be an audio animatronic, and as it would spin around, you would see his collection of all kinds of exotic oddities, including his collection of dragons, where there was concept artwork made of a little green dragon wearing a top hat. As Disneyland was planning on building Discovery Bay, a small statuette of Professor Marvel and one of his dragons was made. Sort of a working prototype where you could see him in his exotic costume with his little pet dragon. It never came to be, so that little statue got put up on a shelf in an office. But when Tony Baxter was pitching the Kodak executives, and they said to him, "We're looking for something a little bit more imaginative," Tony Baxter had a light bulb that went off in his head, ran over into the other office, grabbed the little statue of Professor Marvel, switched his name over to the Dreamfinder, and showed it to the Kodak executives, who absolutely loved him, and their reply was, "We love this. Can we also get the dragon?" And this is where Figment would get his design overhaul. where of course he couldn't be green anymore, and they would finally give him the name Figment. Tony Baxter would come up with the name Figment after watching, get this, an episode of Magnum P.I., where Magnum's Bud Higgins would tell him, "Don't tell me the goat is a figment of my imagination. Figments don't eat tropical flowers." So Figment's name is literally to embody the concept of a figment of imagination. Not so shocking, but it coming from Magnum P.I., that's kind of shocking. But there was something else at play here that is way bigger than Kodak's needs, way bigger than a new attraction, and 4 decades later, it seems like their plan has paid off. Figment would get branded purple along with contrasting orange accents, and this is where it gets kind of important for someone like myself. This original version of Figment was like childlike curiosity, not the annoying guy that we see today. Figment's trickster-type personality wouldn't show up until the attraction would kind of get rebooted and then rebooted again. And this sort of prankster Figment that we meet today wasn't exactly fans' favorite thing. But I'm kind of getting ahead, but just wanted to give context on how all the people that love Figment fell in love with a different guy than what I got to meet, or maybe you got to meet if you didn't get to ride the original attraction. And another thing that makes me understand why people must have liked this attraction so much is the Dreamfinder was modeled after Santa Claus. He was supposed to be this friendly, jolly, all-knowing guy that everybody loved to be around, as he would share his knowledge with everyone, including his little curious friend Figment, who would always ask the right question at the right time. You see, if the Dreamfinder was supposed to be Santa Claus, Figment was supposed to represent the small children in the audience, asking exactly the question that they wanted to know at the moment they wanted to know it, and only having, like them, a 1-second attention span. And where this is pretty genius, can you think of something more successful to model 2 characters after other than Santa Claus and a small kid who loves Santa Claus? With their characters all set and a sponsor for the Imagination Pavilion, everything was ready to go. Although it wouldn't be ready for opening day, over the next handful of years, this attraction would go on to be the 2nd most popular attraction in all of Future World, making Kodak pretty happy with their investment. Companion attractions in the Imagination Pavilion would be a 3D movie filmed in 70mm, known as Magic Journeys. I see what you did there. And an interactive play area called Imagine Works. But the goal was that after 4 minutes, you would have an opportunity to fall in love with Figment and the Dreamfinder. And through this journey, you'd have a better understanding of art, literature, and science. Pretty big goal for 4 minutes, but it seems as if it was accomplished because people absolutely love this attraction. But someone very important didn't love this attraction: the Disney executives that were trying to age up and mature their parks. They wanted Figment out of here. They felt like it was cheap and didn't align with their current goals of making hip, older attractions for a hip audience they wanted to bring into their parks. Talking about the Eisner years. But for a strong 15 years, this attraction was the 2nd most popular attraction at Future World, and Figment and Dreamfinder were some of the only characters that would walk around the park, where you could meet the Dreamfinder and he would have allegedly a puppet version of Figment that would maybe goof around with you. And what's important to note here is in the beginning of Epcot, Mickey and his friends were not allowed in this park. So the executives wanted Figment and the Dreamfinder to be seen as the ambassador for Epcot, because Mickey and Buds weren't cruising around. Dreamfinder and Figment would even do TV appearances, one on the Today Show promoting Epcot. So they really went in on trying to make those two the face of not only Future World, but of Epcot. And if you think about it, the Santa Claus kid combo, pretty great way to get attention and bring in parents to come to Disney's new and imaginative park that was kind of hard to describe exactly what it was, and still kind of is today. But in 1998, when the executives were trying to mature the Disney parks, Dreamfinder would go away and Figment would almost be lost forever as well. And where it gets really interesting and kind of mischievous, replace a popular attraction. After all, they got lucky and they were sponsoring one of the most popular rides in the entire park, and they also got lucky and they were tethered into the park's mascot and most popular character invented for Epcot. So with Kodak, it was a win, it was a win, it was a win. But never underestimate sneaky executives figured out a way to get exactly what they want. And with the popularity of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then the theme park equivalent, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, the executives rerouted the entrance and exit for that popular movie. Essentially, taking something that people were coming to Epcot to do and steering them away from the entryway to Journey Through Imagination. And it worked like a charm because basically overnight, executives then had data that they could show Kodak that people didn't care about Figment and Journey Through Imagination, as it had fallen from the second most popular attraction to last place, number 8. And finally, the executives had exactly what they needed to prove to their sponsor it was indeed time to move on. And the entire area where the attraction was at was destroyed and dismantled. The famous rotating floor that brought everybody in, repositioned them, and sent them off on their journey had been destroyed and had been removed. But strangely, the replacement was a much smaller, a much more confusing version of the same ride. They got rid of a hit to replace it with a crappier version of the attraction. I always kind of admire how sneaky and creative executives can be, but at the same time, I'm also always like, why? But why? Why did you do that? What was the plan? Why not just keep the golden goose that was laying those imaginative eggs? So the ride was closed, the building was gutted, the replacement, Journey Into Your Imagination, eliminated the Dreamfinder and reduced Figment down to a cameo role. And it replaced the rich imagery, scenery, and storytelling of its predecessor with just simple decorations, cheap optical illusions, and smart aleck humor. And the worst part, moving the ride even made it shorter. So it was just a lose all across the board. Fans were super bummed on the new version. They couldn't quite figure out, A, where did the Dreamfinder go? And B, why did Figment's personality completely change all of a sudden? And after 2 years of lots of complaints, they already had to go in and adjust the attraction, spending over $8 million to put Figment in the ride as many times as possible, and even to add back in the hit song, One Little Spark, which seems to be sort of a running narrative where executives get one idea, they blow something up, they come up with another idea, and then what do they end up doing? Spending tons and tons of money trying to rewrite their wrongs. It's fascinating how it works over and over again. It's almost like executives to watch YouTube because all of the lessons that they can learn are in all of these different videos. So after 2 years of declining ridership and nothing but complaints, Disney executives were forced to shut the attraction down again. Forced to go through the ride, redesign it, add Figment as many times as possible, and even though it's been seen as a marginal improvement, it still does lack the understanding of exactly who is Figment and why should we like them, which is where I come into the picture. When I rode this attraction, I was just like, I don't get it. I don't get it. Most Disney fan things live up to the hype. This one, I'm just not getting. I was more than dumbfounded at how little sense it made to me. And people that I respected and love liked Figment. And I just was like, dude, he sucks. Not realizing that I was tapping into what fans had already known. The new version just was the old guy, but not the old magic. As Tony Baxter said, yeah, you get to meet Figment, but you don't get to realize who he is. And according to management, that's good enough. And that's just sad because what they have here is one of the most bizarre, worst Disney attractions I've ever rode on, which is crazy when you don't understand the backstory like I did it. How is this guy so popular when his ride is so bad? But there was a much bigger part to all this story that I also didn't understand. And that when they were designing the Imagination Pavilion, the request was, let's try to make Figment this park's Mickey Mouse. Because as I said earlier, the rules were going to be Mickey and friends would stay at the Magic Kingdom, and Epcot would be an entirely different Disney experience. Grown up, more mature, so they would have a little purple dragon instead of a talking and walking mouse. But inside of the attraction, there were no limits to who Figment could be and what he could do. Being a figment of his imagination, he could be a cowboy or he could want to be a spaceman. And there was even lines about him wanting to be a spaceman. Therefore, giving marketing and product development the availability to basically put Figment in any scenario or scene that they wanted to, because after all, anything was possible with imagination. So even though the attraction didn't make any sense, the marketing initiative did. And I hadn't realized that Figment had been placed in this park to become this park's Mickey Mouse. And when you look around 4 decades later, I have to say, that part was way more successful than the actual attraction. Figment could be a superhero, a cowboy, a skunk, a dancer, a mountain climber. There's no limits to what Figment can be. There's also no limits to how he can be marketed and sold into products. Figment was marketing, imagined into a character that would become a theme park mascot. And even though the executives may have broke Figment's magic, they didn't break his marketing appeal, remaining one of Disney's top earning characters and still the embodiment and face of Epcot Center. They had done exactly what they set out to do, to create this park's version of Mickey Mouse. And with how hard Disney has been leaning on Figment, the Dream Finder, his image, his likeness, his merchandise, and with overall fan excitement, it does seem like the little guy is due to get his 4th iteration of Figment at Epcot. The fans want it. They have shown with their money that they're ready for it. Disney, you gotta give them what they want on this one. It's a no-brainer. Liberate Figment. And like a lot of people, I do hope that we'll get an announcement soon of a new attraction, because my man is way too popular to be doing what he's doing right now. I really wanted to do this video outdoors, but the weather's not cooperating, so hopefully this worked for you. Man, there's so many good shots outside that I'd pre-planned, and we ended up in here. Brickey here on the edge of the Imagination Pavilion that's lacking a little bit of imagination. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive. I appreciate you showing up, and I appreciate your time. Hope you feel like the video was worth it.
Hours waiting in line for a popcorn bucket.
I don't know if it's worth it.
Does not make sense. Ginger Gadsden, make sense of this for us.
I cannot, and I will not try.